She was like this amazing woman that kind of walked into a room and lit it up. She had friends everywhere, everyone seemed to love her. I'm aware that I've kind of made her into this like incredible human in my head, but I genuinely think this is how she was.
Just tell us about how she died.
When we were living in Dubai, and my mum had had this like nasty cough for probably like 6-7 months at this point, and had been getting it checked, and it was diagnosed as like pneumonia at the time and whatever else, and kept going back, didn't go away, and then January 10th, 2012, she was in hospital, and they told her that it wasn't pneumonia, it was stage 4 lung cancer. She was a really fit woman. Like I've said it to somebody before, it's like me turning around tomorrow and being like, oh, I've got stage 4 cancer. Like it didn't fit, like none of it made any sense. I'd finished school and the 4 of us were there. My brother, my eldest brother Seb, picked us up in the car and took us all over to the hospital, and I think he'd been like, oh, we have to go to the hospital to go see mummy, and we were like, okay, sure. Like we just thought, you know, we never anticipated that, and we came into the room around her bed, and my mum that said she had stage 4 cancer. And we were like, whew. Pretty soon after that, my mum had to leave Dubai, so she went back to England, and she went to the Royal Marsden in Cheam and was getting treatment there. And we were still living in Dubai, so that first like 6 months was pretty tough because she didn't want to bring us out of school, but my dad was going back and forth between Dubai and England. As soon as the school year finished, so June time, we all obviously moved back to England. So she continued to have treatment from that January 10th until she died the following March 23rd, which is actually quite a long time, because at the start, whew, it's a good thing. I don't know why I'm crying. At the start, they said it would be like 4 to 6 weeks. And it wasn't. It was like 15 months. So March 23rd, it was, I think, about 8:30 in the evening, 20 to 9 maybe. And we were all round her bed. So there was, by that point, I mean, she'd been pretty unwell. You couldn't really speak to her very much, or she wasn't really there. I just remember her breath got so like quiet, and so unoften. And you hear each one and you just wonder whether that's going to be the last one. And you kind of hope that it is, because she looks like she's in so much discomfort. But then obviously it's so final whenever it is the last one. I don't think I have spoken about this before. She obviously died. I can still hear my grandma scream.
I went through like the exact same thing with my stepdad, who was like my dad, and I also was like, it's weird because I was 10 and I was like, I want that to be his last breath because it sounds painful and it sounds really hard, but it's almost like I felt guilty.
The last breath it's so final, there's never going to be another one, which is like this massive valley, I guess, where you're like, oh, that's it, that's the end. Yeah. But at the same time, you kind of want that to happen because it doesn't seem fair. And I actually remember whispering to my mum, being like, it's okay, you can stop fighting, like you don't need to carry on. And then I felt so guilty afterwards, because all I could think was, I've just taught her to die. I ran out the room, and I don't know why I ran out the room. It's probably me just running away from my problems. And I fainted 3 times. I have this very distinct memory of my eldest brother, who at the time I remember thinking he was so grown up. Like he just seemed like the most adult person in the room at any time, and he was 22. And he looked at himself in the mirror and he was crying, and you could see that he was annoyed that he was crying, and he slapped himself so hard around the face to try and stop himself from crying, because in that moment all he could think was he needed to pull himself together to be there for everybody else. We just walked back to the room, and obviously we just sat there for a few minutes. It was so weird when we went back to the house, because you realise that you're never going to go back to the hospital again. And particularly in those last like 3 or 4 weeks, we'd spent so long at that hospital, like in the room or in the little waiting room at the end, just spending time with my mum. And then you go home and you realise, God, we are never, well, hopefully we're never going back there again.
What does it do to you day to day when you lose the most important person in your life at such an important age?
For a long time I was angry, but I was actually angry when she was ill as well. So I think that started a bit earlier than when she died. And I remember I was just so angry all the time at everything because I didn't understand why this was happening, why it was happening to us, why it was happening to my mum. It's definitely stayed for a very, very long time. And it's something that I'm working on still. I don't think I think the trauma of something like that stays with you, even when you think you're over it. You know, sometimes you can look at other people's lives and go, well, it's not as hard as that. But I think you still need to experience whatever it is that you experience. My mum at one point said, you can't compare your sadness, because if you compare your sadness, you have to compare your happiness. It is upsetting. At the beginning, after my mum died, I was like terrified to change too much. I didn't want to be any different than the Claude that my mum knew, because I just thought the further I get away from that, the least my mum's gonna recognise me. I basically scared myself out of changing because I didn't want to be anything other than that 17-year-old that had her mum, or probably even that 16-year-old that had her healthy mum. You realise very quickly that life continues, and even when you don't want it to, life very much carries on. And she never saw me play rugby, and there's been moments where I've thought, this would be really cool for her to experience. When I played sport at school, she was always the one that was on the sideline. She was always the one, oh my goodness me. She was always the one I looked for on the sideline, and the one that I would play extra hard for, or I'd run extra fast for, because I wanted to make her proud.
How do you think your grief kind of affects you day to day, and particularly your sport?
For a long time it affected me a lot more. It still definitely affects me, but it definitely affected me a lot more. I mean, I cried myself to sleep for years, I think, almost every night. Which sounds so ridiculous, doesn't it? Like, some people are just so much stronger and they just get over these things, not get over these things, but it just seem to hide it and move on a lot better. I don't think I did that very well.
But how do you kind of get through that? Because triggers of grief can be so small, right? But they can be things that you're just not expecting.
I think it's the ones that you're not expecting that are the worst. The whole idea that there's not one way of getting over it, well, no, there isn't one way, but when you're a 17-year-old kid, you want to be told a way, because no one really tells you anything. Because I think people are almost too scared to say the wrong thing that they then don't say anything at all.
Do you think it's kind of affected your performance in rugby?
I think it has, because it's made me want to achieve things, I guess, because for the same reason I want to make her proud. I want to know that if I'm moving away from that 17-year-old, she did know that I'm moving in a really positive way towards somebody else that she would be proud of. Sometimes I do silly little things, like I said before, like I don't believe in heaven or anything like that, but sometimes if I'm singing an anthem, I just kind of look up a little bit and think of her, which is quite nice. Occasionally I'm like, this one's for you, or I hope you can see this, or something. Other times it can be pretty bad as well. So you get the other side of sport where you get injured. So I did my neck recently, just for the World Cup, and I thought I was going to have to retire from sport. I remember even then thinking, God, if I just wanted my mum. I just went straight back to being a child again. All I wanted was just to be like wrapped up in a cuddle by my mum, which was quite a strange concept for me, because I hadn't thought like that in such a long time. And I was like, God, I didn't realise that I still wanted that, I still needed that in my life. So sometimes, you know, it's at the good times when you wish that they were there, and then sometimes during the really bad moments, you want them to be there too, just to help you along the way.